Hey, this is Chris with Majesty Woodworks. Today we're fabricating a couple Boveda holders to be placed inside of some custom humidors we've been working on. They'll all be fastened to the inside of the humidor lids. Now, all the information and tricks you see in this video apply to any size and any shape Boveda holder, so long as you have one flat edge to reference off of, so stick around. Like anything in woodworking, layout and setup are the most important and probably the most time-consuming things in this project. I'm using a 1/4 inch spiral upcut bit from Whiteside. Aside from aesthetics, the grooves allow the Boveda pack to properly humidify the entire box and circulate away from the Boveda pack. I start by using a carpenter square and a straight edge to make some marks on the router table and the fence. I line up the router bit so the very top of the cutter is parallel with the fence. Then I use the square to put a straight edge up to each side of the cutter so I can mark the table and the fence. These marks will eventually help me position my stop blocks. Next, I turn the cutter head 90 degrees so the widest part is perpendicular to the fence. You can see I've already laid out the marks on the Boveda holders. In this case, I was making a couple of them so I have two pieces of Spanish cedar taped together. When I mark the lines on the faces, I transfer them to the edges as well. The edge marks are what will help me align the cutter head since I turned the cutter perpendicular to the fence. If that's confusing, you'll see what I mean shortly. One quick thing to note, the little half moons or crescent moons drawn on the sides are going to be cut out just for aesthetics. The lines I'm drawing here will determine the length of the grooves out from my inside mark on the workpiece. The marks on the inside of the workpiece and the outside marks, or the marks I'm drawing here, will line up with the marks I made on the fence. Since the crescent moons are getting cut out of the sides, I wanted the grooves to stop about a 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch away from the edge of the moon. Again, don't get carried away with specific measurements. Just do what you feel looks best. Let's talk about equal gaps between the grooves. I'll run through the math real quick, so listen up. We have 5 grooves, each at a 1/4 inch for a total of 1 1/4 inches. I have a space of 3 1/2 inches to work with, so subtract 1 1/4 from 3 1/2 and we come up with 2 1/4 inches. There are a total of 4 gaps, so divide 2 1/4 by 4 and we come up with 9/16. So there's exactly 9/16 inch of gap between each groove. Okay, so those marks you just saw me make on the outside of the Boveda holder are what we will line up with the marks on the fence as our entry point. Line the mark up with the furthest mark on the fence, or what would be the far side of the cutter head. Butt your stop block up to the end of the work closest to you and clamp it down. Next, the inside mark on the Boveda holder, line that up with the mark on the fence that's closest to you, or what I would call the inside of the cutter head. Butt your stop block up to the far side of the work and clamp it down. Since the grooves all line up about a 1/4 inch short of dead center of the Boveda holder, this stop block never changes. Set it and forget it, don't move it. From here on out, routing the grooves is mostly a rinse and repeat process. As long as your workpiece is square, you don't have to set this up once for one side of the holder and again for the other side. You simply route one side, flip your workpiece over, and route the other side. So you can see that I'm basically plunging the workpiece onto the router bit. I'm going through close to a 1/2 inch of material, so in order to prevent burning, I kind of wiggle the workpiece back and forth as I plunge. Truth be told, best practice here would probably be to turn the router off before lifting the workpiece. If you lift the workpiece while the bit is still moving, at best, you risk gouging the material, and at worst, you risk the bit catching on the material and throwing it at you or across your shop. Don't ask me how I know that. So now it's time to tap the fence over so you can line up the router bit between the next set of lines on the edge of the workpiece. The router bit never seems to stop in the exact position I want it to, so turn the bit so that it is perpendicular to the fence again. And again, this is all a rinse and repeat process. Just tap the fence over so it perfectly lines up between your two marks. Lock the fence down and reroute. Here, I think you can see a little bit better that the entry point on this groove is a little more inset than the first groove. So route that groove, then flip it over and route the other groove. So let's talk about how to get the groove inset from the end of the workpiece. Back to the lines I marked on the fence. Remember, the line on the fence that is furthest from you is the entry point of the router bit into the workpiece. Line that mark up with the line on the workpiece, Then butt your stop block up to the end of the workpiece and clamp it down. Raise your router bit back up so it can get through all the material, and you're good to go. And here you see me wiggling the workpiece back and forth. Again, this helps prevent burning. Flip the piece over and do it again. So this obviously isn't a difficult process. It's pretty monotonous actually, but the measurements don't have to be perfect. We're not necessarily going for precision here. It's all about what looks best on the Boveda holder. The fourth groove that I'm routing here, as well as the fifth groove, are both the same length. Once I set the stop block for the fourth groove, I won't change it for the fifth, but we still have to tap the fence over between routing the fourth and fifth groove. So let's talk about equal gaps between the grooves again real quick. This is a slightly different way to do the math than what I mentioned earlier, but I'll put both examples in the description. Again, we have 5 grooves, each at 1/4 inch, which is a total of 1 1/4 inches of groove space. We also mentioned that we had 3.5 inches of area to work with, but that did not include any space above the top groove or below the bottom groove. So let's account for those spaces and say that we have a total of 4 5/8 inches of space to work with. We have the same 4 gaps, but let's also call the spaces above the top groove and below the bottom groove gaps. That gives us 6 gaps. Take the 4 5/8 inches of space and subtract the same 1 1/4 inches of total width of the grooves. That gives us 3 3/8 inches of leftover space. Divide 3 3/8 by 6 gaps, and we still get the 9/16 inches of space for each gap. The rest of this video is pretty self-explanatory. If you've learned anything from watching this, or if I've earned it in any way, I'd appreciate if you liked and subscribed. Beyond that, sit back, relax, and enjoy some shop sounds. Thanks for watching.